Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Harebrained Games. Today we're going to take a look at a game and do a review of the new GMT game, Hitler's Reich, World War II in Europe. Now, what separates this game from a lot of the other war games that GMT has? Well, for one, it's a card-driven, simplified reenactment of World War II in 1 to 2 hours. It prides itself on not having bunch of army units to move. There's no counters in that regard. There's a lot of things stripped away and streamlined in this game so that you can actually pull off reenacting World War II in a short, reasonable amount of time. It's specified as 1 to 2 players. There are multiplayer variants, 3 to 4 players, but this seems geared more towards the idea of a duel, Axis versus Allies. And so, what does it provide? Is it any fun? Is it too streamlined? These are all questions I had going in, and so let's take a look at the game, and then we can decide for ourselves. So rather than do a full unboxing, I'm just going to show you the game with its minimalistic pieces set up. Now I say minimalistic, although it looks like it's rather sprawling, but actually each of these components is fairly easy to set up. You actually can set this game up in a matter of a couple minutes and be rolling into the game. It really is streamlined in the setup portion. We have the map. The map is represents obviously the Allies, the Soviets and the Americans and British and etc. And then of course you have the Axis powers already set up there. This is for the initial 1941 state. There are other variants of and scenarios that bring you closer to the middle of the action. That start sort of state and time of a given place, like right before Normandy invasion, etc., etc. You've got some basic and simple tracks, nothing more. This is the amount of cards that people can have in their hand. This is the year track, so as the years go by, you'll know. And then some basic special case situations that go along during the course of play. So really minimal. Really just, yeah, that's what you do it. You also have a set of cards, of event cards that everyone can play. These are for Axis and Allies to be able to utilize. There's actually 12 of them, so they would fill up this area too, except that I've set up this game already to play. And at the start of a game, certain event cards just automatically get sent in to kind of seed the gameplay to be slightly different each time. And then the Allies have these cards. This is their deck array of cards that they can play. I've turned these over because these only actually started in 1942. So for the Allies, certain cards don't come into play until then. And then conflict cards. Event cards and conflict cards are the only kind of cards in the game. Conflict cards are kind of your battle cards. Event cards are special abilities you use with the conflict cards in order to try to win engagements or win actions. And then on the Axis side, you see that they have their own array. Hip hip array. And then they as well have their own conflict cards. These, we'll go over these when we do the first sample turn, because these will actually be the Axis powers starting for cards, some of which activate immediately. And then of course there's bases. As you start to control areas on the map, you'll be placing these as you take control to help show control. Naval, only 4 naval for our poor Axis folks. And then of course this is the Allies side, and these are the Russians. So the Allies have a little bit of a different situation, and they have sort of a separation, a natural historical separation, where certain times only cards that relate to Russians can be used for Russian battlegrounds, because they weren't as allied as a naive understanding may lead us to believe. Now, as far as conflict cards, you can see, here's the Russian card, and then here's an American card. This is like a 52 card deck, so basically 1 to 13, and some of the higher level cards, the Jack, Queen, King equivalent, Ace equivalent, will have special abilities that allow for rerolls of dice, because yes, you do also roll dice. So as much as you can set the battlefield in motion, there are times when the dice will tell you not gonna happen. So yeah, the thing to think about with this game is that not only is this a battleground, but these are battlegrounds too. You don't naturally just get to take these cards. You have to fight for these cards the same way you'd fight for territory, which adds an interesting twist, because instead of being able to say, say, oh, I draw an event card, this is what randomly gave me. No, you have to go, you know what, I really want this card because this card would set this action in motion, and I really need it. And so you're battling. This whole area here is actually a battleground, per se. And that's kind of the general layout of it. As far as any other information, there's a lot of handy sheets that come along with it, but we've all seen those from GMT, so I don't need to belabor that point. Alright, well, let's get to the actual first start of gameplay and show you a sample of how this game rolls. Begin the game of Hitler's Reich. Now, to start with, every side, the Allies and the Axis, get a random distribution of some initial cards, a subset that they have available to them at the start of the game. And so these cards that they get will not always be the same, so it kind of seeds a little bit of random replayability during the game. There are 4 types of cards that are available, and we'll go through them one by one. If you obtain a card like this with this symbol, then this is a use till you lose. And this means that once you've got this, as long as you win with this card, then you can flip it over, use it, flip it over, and at the start of your next turn, flip it back up, and it's yours to use again. Which means you don't have to continually repay for it. It's like yours until you lose. Once you lose, then it gets back and you have to rebuy it. So that's probably the most permanent one you'll find in your collection. Second are these, and these are special symbols that says, once I use this, it goes back. So these are a little bit more powerful. So when you use this, it has to go back, and you have to basically take an action to try to win it back. Win back its love. Third are these puppies, which, these actually, when you obtain these, either through the start of the game or through an event action that you take to try to win events, once you get these, you execute their command instantly, and then you throw them into the box, into one of the boxes, the game box, top or bottom. The reason for that is that these only come back out under circumstances such as year change or shuffling your deck change that kind of triggers some rare return of these things. So this kind of meters it in that you won't see this very, very often, or be able to reacquire this as often as the other 2 types of cards. Finally, you have the one-time events, which frankly are, I won this card, this has some momentous action that it takes upon the game map, and then it says, whoosh, you're out of here, never to be seen again. So those are the 4 kinds of actions. In this case, we already played Convoy. Convoy says I get +1 allied hand card. Yes, which means that now my hand size is 1 higher. I will adjust to the track to note that. And then this would go into the box. Hello, Mr. Box. On this side, we have a similar situation where we have an event they can use. This is the only one that actually gets used right away. The rest will stay and get used. Ooh, war production. So +1 card in your hand. Increase hand size. Well, what do you know? So, increase hand size. And now they too have another card. So basically, it's kind of a zero-sum advantage, since they both end up getting the same benefit to start the game with. But you'll notice some of the other ones, like these can be used in event conflicts, this can be used in land conflicts when defending. These cards are very situational. And the beauty is you don't randomly get these. You have to take an action to effectively attack a card and try to win it. It's very interesting with this whole battlefield as cards and map included. Now, you don't have to lay it out like I have done, but I do prefer it this way, because it's so much easier for me to remember what cards are what cards, especially until I played my 20-umph game. Yeah, so with that, let us get started. Axis always starts first. We're now going to execute a turn 1 for the Axis. We have turn 1 of the Axis. Now here's what they have at their disposal. There are effectively 7 actions you can do, which might sound like a lot, but to be honest with you, only 2 of them are going to be operations you do much more often than you do the other 5. There's Reorganize, which is a way to rearrange your hand if you're kind of really screwed for your card selection. For the conflict cards, these are the things you actually fight with. These are the cards, the event cards are what you use to augment the battle cards, the conflict cards. Fortify literally is nothing more than placing one of your fortifications on a land parcel that you control, which increases the possibility of being able to retain that if you're attacked by letting one of the dice be increased to either 4 or 5, depending on the rules. We'll get into that later. Reinforce happens to have one of two big things. Otherwise, one, it lets you try for a big push, which is a risk. You roll 3 dice, and if that number is, I believe, less than a given card that you have to play, then you get a big push marker. And that means that on a turn, when you execute a big push, you are automatically guaranteed at least 2 attacks or 2 event tries, even if they fail. So that's a little way to kind of get, well, effectively a big push by preparing for it. Those are the 3 ones that you'll use as needed. The other 2, and the big push, an operation are special things that have their own special rules, like, hey, Normandy, hey, Barbarossa. Those come into play, and they have their own special custom rules that you execute in their own fashion, almost like you set aside your normal gameplay and you execute this sort of event, this master event that has the ability to possibly radically alter the game board. And then finally we have event actions and attack actions. Now notice on this board that there are already emblazoned places. So when you start the game and you're not doing one of the mini scenarios, you start with no pieces. It's literally like they're custom crafted, ready for you. And so it sort of makes it easy in that you don't have to worry about like adding units, although I do miss having that kind of visceral feel of these like objects that represent armies and stuff. But ultimately, this is the control of the Axis, this is the control of the Allies, as of course when you start the game until you execute the special action Operation Barbarossa, and then, then there's a Nazi-Soviet pact in effect. Neither side can really do anything on the Russian front as far as attacking or impugning on territory or such. Plenty of other things they could do in the meantime, though. So anyway, we'll go into the event action first. Now, let's say, as far as the Axis, and I'm not saying this is the best move, but they've got a special ops. So they want to go for an event. Say they want to keep continuing to increase their hand size. But that's a good move? Well, we don't know. But that is their action right now, is that they're going to try for that event. So they go in and they pick a card and they try and decide, okay, of the cards that I have, and the Axis start with a nice big powerhouse of cards, while the Allies have to gradually get more powerful by adding hand size, and during D-Day they'll get a card, an ability to grab some high level cards just to kind of express their power. The Axis start off very strong, already guaranteed to have some high powered cards. In this case, we really want synthetic fuel. We don't know if we want it that bad. Do we risk doing maybe a 9 or do we do an 11? We're going to risk an 11. Now, we don't reveal that yet. Let's say, because we go down the order of priority here, and that order is play event or events, and then play conflict cards. So I'm going to use this so that everybody knows I'm using this, and I can re-roll 1 or more dice. If no dice re-roll, put it back and I don't have to worry about it. So if I choose not to re-roll, then I can reuse this end again. Otherwise it's going to go back in the deck array. And then this side, it's like, well, do I really care or do I not? And in this case, I can only use this one, which is outfoxed. Instead of choosing a conflict card, your opponent must shuffle all cards in hand and randomly select one. That's pretty powerful, but I don't know that I want to expend it on this particular conflict, so I'm not going to play any event cards as the Allies. Then we play the event cards now. Unbeknownst to me, I'm going to pick something. I don't know that I want to... I'm going to be needing some high-powered cards, so I'm going to go ahead and risk an 8. We're just going to make it an 8, and yeah, 8 it is. So there we go. So this is how that goes. Alright, so now we have the event cards. And now we roll the conflict, we roll conflict and bonus die. So there we go. And this can be simultaneous, or you can add suspense, whatever. Right now it's 3 dice. So it's always 3 dice unless something tells you otherwise. Ooh, that's pretty good. Okay, so 3 dice for that. 3 dice for this sucker. Alright, they're not looking good for the Allies, so they've pretty much gone, I'm fine. So 8 plus 5 is 13. plus 5 is 18. So they have 18. Already we know that this is more than 18, so player may reroll. So at the end of the event conflict, we're not going to go ahead and use this because we don't need to, which is nice. It lets us go back and use it again. Probably would have been nice to have gotten a little bit closer from the allies. And since this wasn't a tie, he doesn't have to lose the tiebreaker. So basically, this card is now ready for use, and he has won his event action. Now that's pretty cool, right? Right. So then we put everything back. The cards that we played here, the conflict cards, are always discarded, so they go in a discard pile. Look at those guys. Alright, so they determine the winner, and then everybody draws back up to their hand size. Sometimes when you win certain cards, they can adjust hand size and do some other things if they're like one-time use or recycled events, I believe they call them. Alright, so now we've got 4 cards here. He's ready to roll. He's got some storming to do, and he's still at a measly 2 cards, but he's not gonna worry about that. Oh, and since this was an increased hand size, it too goes into the box. Hand size increases again, and another card. How cool is that? Alright, so now that they've done his action of the turn, because he won the first action, he has the possibility of using a bonus action. This is definitely a game where you push your luck as far as you can. You could do as little as 1 action, or you could do as many as several. You could do a blitzkrieg action, you could do a special production action, you could do another bonus action. It gets a little crazy with all the actions you can do, but you gotta keep winning. So with that, we know that the bonus actions can be pretty much anything. Reorganize, fortify, reinforce, event action, attack action. So other than a big push, yeah, that's pretty much sky's the limit. So this would be a time for him to go, hey, should I reinforce or should I try again? Should I try for another event? Should I try to attack? I think I'm going to try to attack, so let's go through and attack. So as a bonus, he's going to try and attack Yugoslavia. Why? Well, 'cause. And this time he's going to play Master Spy, which says that the opponent must reveal their selected conflict card before you choose yours. Wahaha. And so what is he going to do? That could cancel out. Well, he's just going to not do that. So then the allies and the Axis are going to pick their chosen card to fight over Yugoslavia. Now this one's pretty important, so he's going to play one of his high-powered cards here, the 12, which wins ties because it's a German card, and it can re-roll up to 2 dice. So that's the second to the best card he's got. Same thing with the Americans. They don't really want to lose Yugoslavia quite yet. So they're going to put there. So then we do the same thing. We're going to roll our dice. Ooh, that's not a bad one. Roll our dice. Oh! Silly me. I was supposed to have that Master Spy take effect. So let's pretend that I use that, and then he decided to just match it. Notice, because this should have made me actually have to put the ally card down first. My mistake. I'm still going to go with this dice roll, though, to keep things rolling. Har har. And then, oh, that's interesting. So 4, 8, 9. So right now, it looks like the allies have an edge. They have 5 and 4 is 9, 10, 11, 12, and 12 is 24. 9, 10, 11, 24 to 21. Now, thankfully, both of these get to re-roll up to 2 of their dice. So obviously he's going to stick with this and try to roll that. Oh, that didn't help. That didn't help at all. And so he's going to stick with it. Yeah, he's going to stick with that. So they don't... Yugoslavia is not going into the hands of the Axis powers this time. So that was not a well... And since this is lost, it was used up either way, it goes back to the opponent, who will then put it back out in the common events, since there are common events, Axis-specific events, Allied-specific events. Alright, so these get discarded, these get discarded, And that is that for the ally or Axis turn. They had their chance. They do get to draw back up. That's their conflict cards. This is one of the interesting things to try to remember, is that it's not like you use your cards and then when they go down you have to refill them. You're constantly keeping the highest number of cards you can in your hand. The reason for that is the decks are timers. At the end of when you've exhausted through all these conflict cards, that is the time when you're going to basically drop your part down to another year. Now both sides have to actually be in the slot before it's truly the end of 1941. So this could go ahead, and then this is the end of 1941. This could go ahead, but that doesn't end 1942 until they both go ahead. So that's kind of how it keeps rolling. So you've always got a maximum hand size, but your opponent is always trying to drop the maximum hand size you're allowed to have. And so that's an interesting kind of back and forth tug of war that you'll see. We're going to do one more turn with the Allies, and they begin, and you know, they don't want to do any of these actions here because that just ends your turn. You don't even get a chance for extra actions. They want big extra actions. But what would be interesting, actually, they're going to fight for the channel. So let's do an attack action. Attack in an area. Yeah, let's attack. No, let's not do that yet. If we try and reinforce the channel. Should we do that? Try and take control of it, because that'll make it harder for the Axis to try and take control. Because if they take control of that north channel, my hand size drops by 1, because that production center is mine, and I don't want to lose it. I definitely don't want to lose London, and I don't want to lose the Irish. No. You know what? I think we're going to do something. Oh, I can't go after Romania either, because the Nazi-Soviet pact is still in effect. So, what am I to do? Well, let's try for Libya. Let's have some fun. We're going to go after Libya. No, it's not the wisest thing to do, but we're going to show it anyway. And we're going to play both of our cards, because we think Libya is awesome to try to get a hold of. So, we use it in a land, sea or event conflict, so my opponent has to shuffle and take a card randomly. That's awesome. And I get an extra die. So this is kind of a nice big wham bang. Definitely would not do this in a normal situation. In this case, used in land when defending, I get to add an extra die, up to 5 dice. So General von Rundstedt is going to help out here. Now we play our conflict cards. Now guess what? Because of that special card there, we're going to have to just randomly pick one and wonder what it is. And I'm going to leave us all in a bit of suspense. So let's say he's like, you know, I'm feeling lucky. I'm going to go ahead and use my okay, I'm going to use my Major General. Alright, so now we've got these suckers going, and that's that. So, okay, we roll the conflict die. Okay, we're going to reveal 10 for me and 5. Alright, but there's still die to be rolled. I roll 4 die. Oh, that's horrible. And he rolls 4 die because he's defending. Oh, that's not my friend. Okay. So, and there's no reroll, is there? No, there is not. Alright, well, how'd that go? Let us add it up. Resolve the conflict card special properties. None of those. Determine winner. Alright, so 10, 14, 15, 16, 17. So 19. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 5 is 16. Wow, I barely won, even with all that going for me. So that's that. I have won this, which means I now get to mark this as mine, and that's awesome. So that's done, and these cards disappear and get refreshed. This card disappears and gets refreshed. These cards are used, so they go to my opponent, who will then put them back on at the start of his turn. And because he lost, this has to go back too. Darn it. So that was not a fun time for the Axis. That outfoxed card is pretty nasty. Alright, now we have an opportunity, and so now I have a second action. Now I could try and do an event and say, you know what, I'm out of event cards, so I'm going to try and get an event card here and try and get some cards that help out. I mean, with the Allies, you got to be careful, because once Russia's in the game, you're going to need Russia-specific cards when you're dealing with Russian-specific theater. But in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and go, you know what, I'm going to take an action, discard a card, which, since this doesn't require fighting over, best thing to do is take a small, like a low price card and ditch it. And that lets me put this here, so now I have a fortress to defend in case they come to take back Libya. As if Libya was really all that consequential. It probably was, but not at this particular time. But that's a little bit of the gameplay sample of what you're doing. The actual interaction between the cards is pretty quick. Playing two-handed slowed it down a bit, but in general, you have... in general. Sorry, didn't mean to get all corporal on people. But the general idea is to go back and forth very quickly with actions. The biggest thoughts that I had in this game, the things that was basically taking the most time, was just figuring out what the right action to do. And then some of the larger scale special operations can take a while, but there's only 3 of them in the game. For the most part, what you saw, the back and forth and the different actions, is absolutely the meat part of the gameplay. So with that, let's get to my final thoughts on what I think of Hitler's Reich. So, final thoughts on Hitler's Reich. Now, we'll start off with the cons and then go to the pros and then my summary. Now, it has been suggested that the rulebook / playbook leaves things to be desired in the brevity department, and that there's been suggestion that the rulebook kind of obfuscates and elongates what was really a fairly simple game at heart. Even the playthrough I showed you, you'll see that for the most part, it's a pretty simple cadence of operations when you're playing this game. It's not... I don't actually personally think the rulebook is bad. I know there's a couple things that are... a couple terms that could be more precise, and a couple areas where they could expound a little bit more. Organizationally, I think it does okay. I think it's because I'm adjusted to the GMT rulebook styles, and I found this not even to be close to the worst I've ever encountered in rulebooks in general. I think it did a decent job. I mean, I expect with GMT that the rulebook part is dry, in that it's, you know, the Dewey Decimal System, point by point, like, here it is, here's where you find information that's as precise as possible for avoiding rules, interpretation ambiguities. The thing that I think it fell down on for me is the actual playbook. Now, in GMT books, you have the rule book, which is, like I said, the exhaustive rules, and then a playbook that kind of is more of an approachable way to discover the game, get a few sample turns, learn a little bit about it, and kind of imbue kind of the, okay, here's how you set up, here's how you go. Neither one of these, I think, did a good job of saying, hey, let's start from the very beginning, and here's a picture of it laid out, of the game laid out, ready to go. Here's the first few turns. GMT has done a pretty good job with that. Coin games, for example, which are far more complicated than this, their playbook has been excellent to me in saying, pick these 10 cards out, and then we're going to step through this turn by turn from the very start, and by the time we're done with, say, the first 7 or 8 turns, I understand kind of the flow of the game. The exceptions, we'll figure those out over time. This one did kind of what I thought Pericles did that really tripped me up, and that is kind of like start in the middle, or start with these scenarios that happen without really cementing for me just how the gameplay flows, because a couple sample turns at the beginning would have been more than sufficient to go, oh, this is from the, I get this. And so I think the playbook was more of a stumbling block to me than the rule book. Either way, I think it's manageable. I think of course, there's been a lot of help online and facts and an excellent playthrough video, and so a lot of that's mitigated over time. But that is one of the dings I think that is against it as a con. Definitely don't think it's as dramatically bad as maybe some others suggest, but it's fine. I really like playbooks to really sort of start from the beginning and move me forward, even if it's a game that's described as simple. And the other thing is, I mean, it's like the game does set itself up and kind of present itself as being like, hey, this is simple. In fact, like one of the lines in the playbook, like right away when it starts with design notes and then goes into examples, which is weird. Usually design notes are in the back and you're like, hey, how do I play this game? Not, hey, here's a lot of random facts and trivia about the game. But I mean, it basically, in one of the sentences, the Hitler's Reich game system was deliberately designed to be quick playing and intuitive once the rules are learned. Now, I didn't think about that a second thought, but I guess that second part, the caveat, was a warning. Once the rules are learned, then it's intuitive and then it's fun to play. So, lesson learned. No, it's not that big of a deal, but it's worth mentioning because it is something that I know has tripped people up, and I definitely think it could have been an improved experience. But yeah, so it did retard my velocity in learning, but it was not, in this larger scheme of things, too bad. Because really 90% of the game is just a staccato dance of two combatants. 10% of it are exceptions to the rules or big momentous operations that go out of the grain of the normal thing. And unfortunately, I think the manual, because of the way it's set up, can misconstrue the complicated parts into making the whole game feel more complicated than it really was. The map is serviceable. It's obviously not going to knock your socks off in the artwork department. It's utilitarian layout and design. At first I was kind of not that impressed, but it serves utilitarian function and very cleanly. It's like a well-cleaned wing of a 1940s hospital. Like, everything's pristine and ready and stark and efficient, so no worries on that. And the other thing is, there was a 3 to 4 player version of this that was described, but there's no way I would ever play 3 to 4 players with this. This really feels like a duel and meant to be a duel. So those are the things that are kind of like, nah, not so good. But the pros, let's get into the things I did like about the game. I love that the cards and the battlefield is a map and cards. Like, the whole aspect of having to fight for your cards to play, the special cards that give you bonuses, is really clever to me. It's something I haven't seen a whole lot of, per se. Usually you get this random stack, like Quartermaster General, like, hey, you draw these cards up, and sometimes you get the good ones, sometimes not. No, you have a very deterministic way to try to get cards. It's deterministic enough that you get to choose what cards you are, but it's not determined whether you can win them or not based on the cards in your hand in the conflicts that will ensue between you and your opponent. Love that. I love the clever way that it steers the flow of the game to match history without shackling it into a sort of a World War II on rails experience. For example, just the starting hand. Your starting hands, like the Axis get a little boost right away in the early portion of the game, which historically is fair. They were the ones who had the initiative in that regard. But over time, the Allies will gradually make improvements, and then they will get their benefits. And so it is kind of a game like if, the Axis kind of have a little more of a timely rush that they need to do to try to get resolution and winning and losing, get winning before the Allies kind of can overwhelm them, which I thought was clever. The Allies, on the other hand, have their own detriments. They have to deal with this whole, U.S., England versus, Russia. We're kind of allies, but we're really not, and have to deal with the limits that they have on the cards they can play. But then the Axis have to deal with the Italians, which is always a, loser's game and during a tie. So they have to make those kind of critical choices as well. At certain times, you stop everything and you recreate a pivotal moment, like the D-Day or Barbarossa, etc., etc. And I think that's worthy, and I think that they did the best they could to try to make that not too much of a jarring experience, but it still is jarring. It's and even then, the events themselves might not follow history. Barbarossa could go poorly, or it could go historically well. That's one of the things I like too. The various win and lose conditions come into play differently each game. I like that. I didn't really go over that in the playthrough, but there's several ways to win. You get your hand size up to 12, and you deplete your opponents down to 3 or less. That's a win. You strip your opponent of being able to have any cards at all. It's 0 in the hand when it's time to draw. They lose. Take over capitals, and they have 1 turn left to get their capitals back, or they lose. Take over enough of your opponent's production centers, and they lose, and you win. And so there's all these kind of things where as time goes on, you might see some patterns and go, okay, it's now time to steer this way. Like civilization, like when you do the economic victory, the cultural victory, the political victory, the military victory. Sometimes the civilization, as it goes on and events happen, you go, well, I think I can steer this way and win faster than that way. And that's kind of how this feels too. The bot is one of the most low maintenance bots that I've seen yet. I mean, compared to the coin bots, which are really, really well done, but oftentimes, admittedly, there are times when I just go with these coin bots, which is like basically flowcharts of how to, you know, simulate your opponents. With the coins, sometimes I'll just go, you know what, I'm just gonna like forget it. I'm just gonna do what I think they would do and stuff, because I sometimes I don't like getting bogged down in the details and I want to just get back to my turn. This coin bot, or this bot, is pretty darn streamlined. It will give you a really good simulation without being a lot of overhead. And I thought that was I'm very impressed about that. I'm glad that they were able to keep it minimal, but also keep it reasonably close to a dumb opponent, of which I am foremost guilty of being a dumb opponent. There's no certainty. Even some of the most overwhelming odds can be overcome. I mean, not all of them. I mean, there's certain cases where it's like, okay, there's no way I'm gonna lose this or win this. But there's also that uncertainty. Like, I can play my 5 and he could play his 10, but he could roll 1s and I could roll 6s. It could happen. And so there's always that kind of possibility that you could pull off a stunning victory or be treated to an epic defeat too. And so that also keeps it. Risk reward. Like, I'm applying these cards, you have to risk your cards to use them, knowing that if things don't go well, you could lose them and the engagement and put yourself behind the 8 ball, and your opponent could wind up in the same place. So that definitely creates ebbs and flows if you're not careful. Or, you know, and it does give you like, do I risk this? Do I not? Knowing that if you have extra actions, you could have several ones, but you choose like did you get a production bonus now? And you get a certain bonus there, but you also have a blitzkrieg bonus and perhaps a bonus action. And so, like, do you really do this action? Because if it fails, then all the other actions go away, and it's just it's really interesting risk reward inside of this game that's actually a very quick, fast-paced World War II reenactment. So, final thoughts, and it has taken a while. It's odd for a game that's more simple than most GMT games. I actually am spending a lot more time talking about this game. That should tell you something, that I really, really like this game. I've been waiting for a game of this type, this style, for a very long time. One that had a high level of play and fun factor without the time commitment that oftentimes can't be made. It is 1 to 2 hours, but then again, you know, that's fine. And solo, the overhead of playing solo is great for people like me who spend a lot of time playing solo. It's a game where the minutia of the typical war scenario, like the pieces and the units and the chits and the defense and the armor and all that values, takes a big back seat to just the momentum and moments that make for a compelling experience reenacting World War II. If it was too many details, oftentimes I get bogged down until I kind of tune out or lose focus or lose the plot at certain times. Sometimes I'm okay for a long journey and I'm into it, and other times I'm like, mentally I'm just tapped. But then on the other hand, if this game had too few details and it really did bog down to what people say is just a glorified game of war, the old ancient card game, then I would also walk away feeling unsatisfied, or like it was just a pasted on theme, or it was just not compelling enough. And so this fits straight down the middle, precisely, exactly at the cross section of fun and focus for me. And if other people feel like they would like something simplified like this, the rulebook isn't that bad. There's a lot of help now. It definitely isn't something I would say if you're trying to attract, and the manual even alludes to this a little bit, like Eurogamers or some other types they mention as a fun, casual experience. Their idea of casual at GMT is not casual the way standard people would say. At the same time, once you get through a couple turns of flow, barring the usual stuff that someone can help you through if you're just kind of learning the game, this can become a very interesting, fun, and a satisfying game. If you like history but you don't want to spend a bazillion hours reenacting it, or you have a pathological fear of chits, then give this a shot. It feels like a fast-paced but slow-burning prize fight between Foreman and Grill. So anyway, I really hope that this is just the first in a long series of games like this that continues to introduce and refine this style of play. It's an excellent game of World War II in a nutshell. A couple blemishes aside, I would recommend it to people who want to give it a shot. I wasn't disappointed at the slightest, and I suspect that other people would probably not be disappointed either going into it knowing that give the rulebook some time. So anyway, thanks again, and we'll see you next time on Harebrained Games.